Hello and welcome to Neighbor to Neighbor. My name is Lynn Coram. I'm your host today, and I have with me Al Jerard from the Lister's office. Al, thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
This is a first for you. Phil Turner used to just go into this torture session with us, and now you are the new Lister in town.
That's correct. And keep in mind that Phil was on the job for 27 years and had a wealth of knowledge.
Oh.
I'm the new guy, so take it easy on me.
You know how impatient we are in Brattleboro. I wouldn't. But so you've been there how long? When did you start?
Just about a year. I became a Lister in March of last year, and then when we searched for Phil's replacement, the Board of Listers had made a selection of a fellow who changed his mind at the last moment. Mm-hmm. So I said I would fill in on an interim basis when Phil retired in June of last year. And then as they searched for a new town appraiser, I decided I'd take a shot at it and got selected.
Got selected. Good for you. So Al, tell us about a little bit about your background and where you're from. And
Sure. I grew up here in Brattleboro. We moved here when I was very young, so all my schooling took place through high school here in Brattleboro. Graduate of Brattleboro High School. Then went on to Tufts, and after that I served in the Navy for about 6 years as a pilot. Following that, I got an MBA from Columbia and worked on Wall Street for about 20 years as an investment banker. So I retired for the first time back in '89 and came back to Brattleboro, and while I was here for a couple of years, I served on the Planning Commission at that time. But then I decided to move west and worked in Park City, Utah, and later in Arizona as an appraiser. So I have the background of a licensed appraiser.
I see. So you have really a varied experience, pilot on down. I didn't know all these things.
Yeah, I've done a number of things. They've all been interesting.
Oh, good. And so, so this is like a second career for you, or third career.
Yeah,
basically.
Depending on how you
look at it
and
and count. Yeah.
But I'm really glad that it's worked out this way. I think, I'm really delighted to be back in Brattleboro, and it's good to have a chance to try to have some sort of an impact on the community that you love.
Mm-hmm. So the job of the Listers, what can we expect from that particular office in town?
Well, the Board of Listers and the town appraiser have one big job, and that is to maintain the grand list. And in order to do that, we have to appraise all the real estate and the personal business property that is taxable in the town of Brattleboro. So in order to do that, we have to make, from time to time, we have to make physical inspections of each home and each business and each land parcel in the community in order to appraise them at fair market value, which is the standard that the state has set as they have taken over the educational funding in the state.
And fair market value defined?
Fair market value has been the subject of a number of court cases, and sometimes we think it's an elusive target. But the standard that the state gives us tells us that we have to pay very close attention to actual sales in order to compute one of the standards that the state gives us. We compare our assessed values with actual sales of those properties in order to see if we are fairly close to fair market value.
Mm-hmm. And when you is this the one where if you go below the fair market value, if the assessed value is a certain percentage below fair market value, that triggers another assessment, or that triggers the state to do something? How does that work?
Yeah, there are two principal standards that the state requires as far as how close we keep our values to fair market value. The one we've been talking about, the level of assessment or common level of assessment, commonly referred to as the CLA,
we'll talk about
which
that
we can
that's
cover
huge.
a little later. But the state says you have to maintain that above 80%. And the other measure is a mathematical concept, the coefficient of dispersion, which in hopefully simple terms means that it's a measure of fairness between similar properties. In other words, is this person's business being assessed in a similar manner and at a similar level to another person's, or is this home being assessed in a similar way?
Isn't commercial property easier to deal with than residential? And I say that because I think commercial rents for X numbers of dollars per square foot, and the competition keeps it fairly even. I'm assuming.
In theory, that's true. As appraisers, we use 3 different methods of assessment. A cost method in terms of what it would actually cost to replace a home or a business building. An income method, which is the one we apply principally to businesses, looking at the actual revenues and expenses of the business and making a valuation on that basis. And then the last one is the sales comparison method, where we look at what similar businesses or homes have sold for.
But what I'm asking is, like, I don't know what is the square footage for commercial in town? I don't even know. $10?
Depends on whether you're looking at Main Street or Putney Road
Oh, so
or
it does have
Canal
a
Street.
variation to it.
Yes, we try to set up our grids based on neighborhoods, and so that we can assess them on the same basis. But it might be in the $13 to $15 a square foot for many parts of town.
And that cost, what they charge per square foot, I would think influences how much the building is assessed at and valued at.
Well, that's right. If you depend principally on the income method, and that's the direction that the state is asking us to go. They have, with regard to land trust buildings, they have prescribed a specific income format for use, and we will be using that more and more in the rest of the commercial in order to make it fair.
When you say they, who's the they that has prescribed this? The state or the feds?
The state. It's a part of the tax department, the Department of Property Valuation and Review really oversees how the towns comply with the Act 60, Act 68 requirements.
And then I would think that comparing homes, residential homes, gets trickier, because some people paint their buildings and some people don't, and some people keep their grounds up and some people don't. How much do those factors influence? Because it does influence the sale price.
Absolutely. And because we don't have a building code here in Brattleboro, we go principally by zoning permits to see when people make certain kinds of improvements. But those don't cover interior improvements. If they're not changing the footprint of their building, they don't need a zoning permit. So if they put in a new kitchen and a new bathroom and add a lot of value to the home, we won't pick that up until they sell it and we perhaps see the brochure for the sale, or when we do the next townwide reassessment and we actually make a physical visit to the home.
When you reassess, there's 2 things here. When you reassess, do you always go in the buildings? Inside the homes?
With regard to the homes, we're supposed to inspect every home.
You are, okay.
And so in order to do a townwide reappraisal, as was done in 2005, we normally hire outside data collectors to make a lot of those visits and collect a lot of the basic information. If they run into a situation that seems complex, then one of the lister's office staff would actually go and complete the appraisal.
Could someone legally keep you out?
Absolutely.
Could
That is their right to refuse the lister's entry. However, we always advise them that the state statutes require us to assume the higher level of interior decor or what have you. In other words, to assess them at the higher end of what what might actually be the case. So we try to keep those to a minimum by pointing out that it's probably to their advantage to have us.
Got you again, huh? No matter which way you turn.
Right.
There are state regulations and expectations that govern your work.
That's correct.
That's
Many
correct.
and complex.
Many and complex, and they're getting more and more complex.
That has been the trend. As the legislature tries to perhaps correct flaws or things that didn't work out the way they intended, my sense is they've made the whole property taxation area overly complex.
Overly complex. Do they ever call your office to see how it's going to work out? Do you have much communication with the legislatures to say, you know, if we go down this road, this is what's going to fall out from it? Does anything like that happen?
Since I've been on the job, that has not been the case. We, as a board of listers, took the initiative and asked the legislatures to come in and hear our concerns about how the CLA works and a few other aspects of taxation and problem areas. But haven't had anything initiated from them. Now the state, through the PVR,
What's that?
through the Property Valuation and Review Division that oversees our work, assigns us a district advisor. And so the state gives us some support as we try to meet the standards. For example, an area where we've needed some work was our land schedule, just how we value unimproved land. And so we've had the district advisor helping us to make sure that we're doing it the same way other parts of Vermont are doing it.
But all these, you know, we complain in town about the growing town government, but a lot of that has been driven by the laws that come down from Montpelier. Is that a fair statement?
I'm not sure if that's fair in the listers area in terms of staff, except for the fact that we now have to do a town-wide reappraisal much more frequently than we did. And that does end up being a burden to the town as far as expense. It cost us over $200,000 to do the last town-wide reappraisal.
When was that done?
In 2005, but it actually took 3 years to make all the visits and to compile all the information. Many towns in the state hire outside consultants to do that, and they charge as much as $100 a parcel. We have about 4,200, 4,300 parcels in Brattleboro, so it would have been a cost of over $400,000 had we hired an outside consultant. Now, the state does provide us some funds in order to offset the cost of the reappraisal. And because we've done it ourselves, there has been a minimal cost to the town. We've been able to do it for a price that's close to what the state gives us.
And how much of that information that you collect could you, say you had to do reappraisals more often, and do you have to update every piece of it, or could you do sort of a calculated reappraisal without visiting every home? Would that be legal?
You can. The state says you can do something called a statistical reappraisal.
Okay.
As long as you have, if you have proven to them that you have good basic data to start with. In other words, they're very satisfied with the results of your last real full reappraisal. So they know you have good basic data. They will allow you to do a statistical reappraisal, which does mean just sampling and updating entire groups based on the statistics.
Well, this statistical reappraisal that you mentioned, do you think we'll be testing that out and saying, like, every third appraisal will do a really thorough job, and two in between will do, because property values are changing rapidly?
They have been, although that's changing some currently, but we considered, the Board of Listers just recently made a presentation to the Select Board indicating that we would like to start our next townwide reappraisal work this fall and have it completed by April of 2010. So that would mean a 5-year gap since the last full reappraisal.
And you used to do 10, wasn't it? A 10-year was a typical?
Used to do 10. That was actually even in the town charter at one point. But because of the state standards, you really have to do it probably every 5 or 6 years. We talked about doing a statistical reappraisal this time, but the feeling was that there were some areas, land I mentioned, some areas in the commercial, that we wanted to make sure we had better data. And so I would anticipate that after this next full reappraisal, we should be in good position to do a statistical.
How does your office use technology to assist you in this process?
Software is very important in the work that we do. We have a software that was recommended by the state, a CAMA software, which is Computer-Aided Mass Appraisal System. So it's a software program that was specifically designed for municipalities or counties to do mass appraisal work with. And it's fairly complex, and then interfacing it with the state in order to make sure that they have all the information they need to essentially set the statewide grand list and therefore the state education funding rate is also very complicated, and a number of towns have had problems with their software program and with the interface with the state. The program that was put forth by the states, kind of sponsored by the state, turned out to have some significant defects, and so recently we have changed. We're in the process now of installing a new CAMA software system, one of the 3 largest in the country that's used in a number of communities.
When you put that in the office, I would assume you have to have a lot more memory and so forth to run that kind of a program. Does that cause that kind of ripple effect?
You're right. There is some of that. We've just purchased one new computer for our office, and we will be purchasing at least one more. There was only, of the 4 of us in the office, there was only one person that had a really up-to-date computer.
Okay.
Now we have 2, and we'll soon have 3. But fortunately, the town has done a little more in the technology area recently, and so we just, the town just installed a municipal center server that is designed to hook the various departments together so that some of the replicated work from the town clerk to the listers to planning and zoning will hopefully be eliminated.
That should be helpful.
It's just starting to work now, and we're looking at some programs that should help the efficiency of the community.
And my last question for this session was patterns of home ownership. What do you see happening in town?
That's a tough one to answer. There are a lot of segments of housing, as you know, and of course the Select Board has just decided to form a housing commission to take the place of the previous inactive housing committee. I'm not sure what that will do, but my concern is that we don't see very much activity for new homes by private developers. We see pretty good activity from the Land Trust, for example. They are building homes, they're buying homes, they're converting, for example, the old SD Basketville property to multifamily. They have some low-cost housing in the Weiler building, which they did a beautiful job of renovating. But I wish I would see more activity in the private sector and more new housing activity there.
One of the things I've heard is that Brattleboro has passed the threshold now. It's 50% home ownership, 50% rental, and when a community hits that number, that's basically a sign of a community in decline. because it should be more a 70-30, 70 a home ownership, 30 rental. And the land trust is a big piece of that because they do have large numbers of big homes they've converted into rentals. So what's your...
No, you're right, and it's one of the things that the Board of Listers talks about a lot. When I was growing up in Brattleboro, I considered it to be a middle-class community. I would say today that there are some signs, and what you just talked about is one where we would be below that level today in terms of home ownership or some other measures of our communities.
Our schools reflect that too, I think, with our free and reduced lunch numbers and so forth.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
maybe that's a whole nother discussion where that's going to take the town of Brattleboro, that type of trend.
Well, I don't want to get into politics too much, but I do think that it starts with a vibrant economic community that is attracting businesses and jobs. And if you don't have that, you don't retain the younger people. And you've probably seen a recent statistic showing that Vermont is about the lowest in terms of percentage of population in the 20s and 30s, I believe.
Yes.
So we have an increasingly aging population, and it's difficult if there aren't good jobs for people to come to this community, particularly if they want to buy a home or build a home. There's not a lot of buildable land left in Brattleboro. There has been a lot of conservation, and of course that keeps the town beautiful and rural in nature, but it also means that...
cost of homes.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think we'll have to end this first session. And we thank you for coming out. It's been very important that people know what your job is, and it impacts all of us a lot. And we thank you all for watching. This has been Neighbor to Neighbor. Good day.